Hey everybody, Dan Monaghan here today on our pilot episode of Snare Drum Musings. We're talking about the iconic 5x14 Ludwig Supraphonic snare drum. So, here we go. Snare Drum Musings. Oh yeah. So Ludwig introduced the model LM-400 5x14 Supraphonic snare drum in 1962, and they nailed it. They totally nailed it. This thing was such a win. It became the most recorded snare drum in the history of recorded snare drums. They sold a gazillion of them. 1.2 gazillion, I think, is the latest figure from Ludwig. And with good reason. This drum sounds great in every context, from jazz to punk and everything in between. They totally nailed it. And so this winning formula up with which they came is it's a chrome-plated aluminum alloy shell, the Lud alloy, which they also used for the acrylite snare drums. It's spun from a single piece of aluminum. It's a seamless shell. Most metal drums they start as a single sheet that's bent and welded and then made into a drum. Ludwig spins all their American metal drums from seamless pieces of off the table of aluminum, and so it's a 10-lug drum, and this may have been their first production metal drum that used rolled-in snare beds as opposed to crimped snare beds. Crimped snare beds were made. There would be a machine that would push in on the shell, and it would draw down the material above it, and so the snare bed would be like narrow and deep and sudden. Whereas these drums, they used a rolled-in machining process, and you can see on these. I don't know if the current ones still have it, but there's a tool mark in the center, I guess, where it grabs on it, rolls it in, and what that does is it creates a much wider, much more gradual, shallower, very safe suburban snare bed there. Narrow, deep snare beds are better because they give you better sensitivity, better articulation, less buzz, like all things good that you're looking for, but they're better for calfskin heads. Calfskin will take to imperfections, sudden imperfections in the bearing edge better than plastic will. And by 1962, everybody was switching to plastic. The weather resistance of plastic just trumped everything else. And so everybody's switching to plastic. So industry-wide, everybody's snare beds got a lot more pedestrian at that point. But it doesn't matter because this drum sounds great. It doesn't suffer for that. So this came with 10 lugs. These are the Imperial lugs. They had been making these forever. They still do this deco design. And these Imperial lugs that have springed receivers inside. This came with the P32 butt plate, which I think they used like up until the 90s or something. This would have come with this throw off. This is the P83 throw-off, and this is a great design if you can find one that's not bent. It's great. I have a drawer full of these and they're all mangled, but it's a great design. It has these 12 holes at the bottom, which are a remnant of the days when snares, the actual snares, would be 6 individual strands of snare material. And so what would happen is there'd be each strand would pass through the throw off like this, and so it would double, and then it would go on to it would be this way. It would go on to the butt plate and get clamped, and then they would repeat that. There'd be six total for a total of 12 strands. So there were 12 strand snares, and even after they switched to fixed snares that were then roped to the throw off and the butt plate, they still used this P83 for a while. This was replaced by the P85, I don't know, in the 70s or something, early 70s something. And then this drum, originally this drum came with this muffler, which they call the baseball bat muffler. And this was like a two-stage muffler, internal muffling system. It had this, it had this angled piece of metal with a felt on it, so that if you brought it up this far, it would have this short piece of muffling, and if you brought it up all the way, it would have this giant piece of muffling. And so not a specific, not a very specific muffling system. And also these would push up really hard, like if you push it up on here, that actually creates like a bump on the head. So these were replaced later with the circular mount, shell-mounted internal muffler, where you could turn this knob and you could infinitely adjust the pressure, the upward pressure of the muffler on the underside of the head. And so this drum here is this is a 1966, and I got this drum like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. I bought it on eBay for $138, and it was in terrible shape. It was the heads were all caved in, the snares were mangled, the throw off was bent, the whole drum was just brown. There was surface rust on the hoops, but I wanted it because it was a 60s drum. I had a bunch of these that got successively older. My first one might have been like from the 80s, and I became fascinated with these older drums because of the hoops. And I took this all apart, took everything off the shell, cleaned it as best I could, re-lubed everything, cleaned all the tension rods, re-greased everything, cleaned as much surface rust off the hoops as I could, put it all back together. This drum's been resto-modded with a P85 throw-off, because the original one was mangled. And plus I love the P85s. They're super smooth and super reliable, and they're $22 or something like that, so they're great. And this has the original P32, and I've taken the internal mufflers out of every drum I've ever owned except for this one. I never use it, but it's just the baseball bat that just looks cool. That's objectively cool. So I'm willing to sacrifice a pure, uninterrupted column of air for the aesthetic coolness of the baseball bat muffler. But I love this drum, and I love the hoops. So all the Supraphonics came with triple flange hoops, and they still do. The design remains unchanged. They have different throw-offs now and different snares, but the shell is the same, the lugs are the same. They have gaskets under the lugs now. The butt plate's different, but it's still the same design. Originally, back in the day, triple flange hoops were made out of steel that was 1.6 millimeters thick. And sometime in the 70s, late 70s maybe, industry standard changed from 1.6 millimeters to 2.3 millimeters. And probably because everything was getting louder, and so they're 2.3, they're stiffer, and they'll bring out more high end. Guys were playing like real hard with heavily amplified music. Yeah, the drums would like cut a little bit more. The rim shots get a little sharper. Anytime you add mass to the drum like that, it makes it a little more high endy. I like the vintage hoops because they're real warm. There's less metal on the drum, so the drum has a little more tone, which I like. Everything I go for with snare drums is all about tone. And it has this super warm cross stick sound, and also I like the proportions of these hoops. They're tall, and so the clearance from the hoop to the head is higher, and that makes it easier to get a good cross stick sound, because it makes it easier to get the shoulder of the stick off the head when you're playing the cross stick. And the other thing I like about these vintage hoops is this last flange. I'm talking about triple flange. A flange is a bend, so it's three bends. It comes up, it bends in, that's one bend, it bends up, which is two, and then it bends out at the top, which is the third. So triple flange hoops. These vintage hoops, the last bend, it bends farther out. the industry standard now triple flange hoops, the 2.3 millimeters, they don't bend over as far at the top. And what this does is this creates a wider surface area, especially for like your cross stick stuff, but even for the rim shots too. So there's more contact with the hoops here, and but without adding mass of like, you know, a die cast hoop. So you can retain the low mass properties, but still getting a lot of metal contact. So the cross stick thing is just gorgeous on this drum. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so even though this drum looks terrible, and this is still like it's the so far my favorite Supraphonic that I've owned. Almost all these drums pitted very badly. This one it's pretty bad. There's something about the plating process of trying to plate chrome to aluminum that somewhere in there are dissimilar metals, and so almost all of these old Supraphonics, they would blister and or flake and just pit terribly. And so this drum, even with my best efforts to make it look nice, it still looks pretty bad, and I don't care at all. The pitting doesn't affect the sound at all. None of them seem to pit on the inside, which is, I don't get that. I don't know what that's about, but yeah, the pitting doesn't change the sound at all, nor does the surface rust that I couldn't clean off these hoops either. Remains totally unaffected. Yeah, so this is an amazing drum. It's super versatile. It's one of my favorite ever brushes snare drums. It might be my second favorite brushes snare drum in my whole collection. The brushes are super articulate and warm. It's like this perfect balance of those two things. It's, you know, aluminum is a fairly like crisp and dry material to, you know, at least for drums, and the chrome plating, I think, seems to make that a little more complex in the high end and not quite as dry as the bare aluminum, like on the acrylites. And so you can get a lot of articulation, but still get nice, great tone out of it. The cross stick thing is epic. So I typically take this drum if I play a lot of brushes, or if I'm playing bossa novas, because anything that's going to involve a lot of cross stick stuff. It's not a super loud drum, so I would use this up through a medium-sized ensemble. It would work for a big band. It would totally work. I tend to favor deeper wood snare drums for big band settings, but this would totally work, because again, you can take it on any gig and it's going to be awesome. But yeah, I favor, if I'm going to play a lot of brushes or a lot of cross stick, I've taken it on organ gigs and it still speaks because like it's crisp and, you know, it's metal. It has like such an immediate response, and but yeah, it's amazing. It's a pretty amazing drum, one of my favorites. So let's take a listen. So those are my musings on the LM-400. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below, or you can shoot me an email at danmonaghandrums@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.